It looks like we are live. Let me start recording on my end. But hello, everyone. My name is Mark Leon Goldberg. I'm the host of Global Dispatches, this very podcast. And Mariana, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Mariana von Zahn. I'm the country representative and director of programs with Mercy Corps in Afghanistan. I spent the last 5 years here. Very excited to talk about Afghanistan today.
And you're coming to me from Kabul. I am
Yeah.
from Global Dispatches World Headquarters in Denver, a world away. But honestly, the topic at hand is not something that is terribly dissimilar from those of us living in like the Western United States, which is water availability and water scarcity. Though in Kabul today, it is an acute crisis. Over the summer, Mercy Corps released a report warning that Kabul may be the first modern capital in the world to just run out of water. Can you describe the scale of the crisis and the issue at hand?
Yeah, I mean, the scale is extremely significant here in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is obviously one of the countries that is probably most impacted by climate change, and it's becoming extremely visible in Afghanistan. As you highlighted, it's one of the first modern capitals that could run out of water in just 5 years. It's a really tight timeline that we're now working against. The aquifers of Kabul are really depleting very rapidly. This is because the groundwater doesn't recharge fast enough. Majority of the groundwater in Afghanistan is supplied through the snow melt, the glacier melt, rain. But all of those aspects have been heavily impacted in the recent years. On top of this comes that majority, 80% of Kabul's groundwater are contaminated. So that leads to a lot of people having to buy water. So, that makes this whole crisis not only a water crisis, but obviously also an economic crisis for the people, because a lot of them spend up to 30% of their income just on water, which is quite significant. We're seeing rising tensions around water in Kabul, but obviously also outside Kabul. About 40% of like tribal tensions that are happening now in Afghanistan are around water. We see that an increasing trend, which is very concerning. The reasons behind all of this, I mean, they're quite a lot, obviously. I mentioned.
Well, maybe let's break them down like a little bit. You mentioned climate change
Yeah.
as being one of the contributing factors here. It's not the only one, and I know we'll discuss other factors in terms of like management of water sources. But in what ways is climate change contributing to water scarcity in Kabul? Is it simply a function of there being less like snowmelt to fill the aquifers?
Yes, that is certainly. We have prolonged droughts in Afghanistan. I mean, we had basically continuous droughts just from 21 to 2024. We will have to see how 2025 really plays out, but we've seen already signs of increasing drought again happening, especially in the northern parts of Afghanistan. The last years, it was we just had 50% of the normal rainfall. Just within the last 5 years that I have been in Afghanistan, I could really see already how winter delays more and more and becomes shorter and shorter. The last 2 winters in Afghanistan were quite mild, really, which is obviously, feels nice, but is, if you look into the impact, really, really bad. So, and this is obviously a trend we see across the entire country.
hmm so supply is obviously, depleting. Demand is increasing for reasons we'll discuss in a moment. But in the meantime, like the management of water resources in Kabul is, at least from what I've seen, not terribly like impactful. People are like drilling their own wells, competing with each other for water. Can you just kind of explain, like, what does the water infrastructure in Kabul look like? And how many people are in Kabul today that are kind of competing for the same water sources?
Sure. So, I mean, let me start with the last point because that is obviously also one of the drivers why this crisis is escalating so quickly, and especially in Kabul, is because I mean, there's been a massive influx of population here. I mean, in 2001, Kabul had about 1 million inhabitants. We are now at 6 million, and with a rapidly growing returnee crisis, these numbers are currently growing quite quickly. In terms of infrastructure, I think we need to differentiate a little bit between, like, how can I say, the bigger infrastructure, such as like the big dams. I mean, there's, for example, Karga Dam, which supplies maybe around, I need to look up the exact number, but if I remember correctly, it was around 30%, 20% of Kabul with water. However, that infrastructure, for example, is already quite outdated. I mean, this dam was built in 1930, and you can see now there already, like, really how, I mean, on the one hand, the lack of maintenance, but on the other hand, also, again, climate change is really impacting this kind of infrastructure. I saw pictures of the dam from, I don't know, 10, 20 years ago, which was like really beautiful, full with water, etc. And I went there last year, and you could see sedimentation everywhere, and it was everything else from still being pretty. Um, so this is that kind of infrastructure. There's been obviously also a lot of planned infrastructure. There was a couple of additional big dams, as well as big pipelines planned in the past. However, with the funding cuts as well as the change in the government in Afghanistan, a lot of these kind of projects came to a complete standstill. So that is obviously the one challenge. And then on a household level, we have seen really, I mean, the borehole drilling in Kabul is literally out of control. I mean, there's about 120,000 unregulated boreholes in Kabul. And the depth of those boreholes is just within the last decade, they became about 20 to 30 meters deeper by now. So we're having by now boreholes that are up to 300 meters deep here, which is not yet the average. The average is still between 100 to 200 meters deep, but it's obviously a trend that they're becoming deeper and deeper. And while there are some sort of policies in place for it, they're not really being implemented or enforced at the moment, which is obviously contributing to the problem.
Yeah, so that was actually gonna be my next question. So, you have dwindling supply because of climate change. You have aging infrastructure in terms of, like, getting water from dams to, the city. You have this proliferation of people digging their own wells in courtyards and basements, all of which, while, like, the population of Kabul is booming and exploding, all of which are contributing to this, like, singular crisis of water scarcity. The de facto authorities, the Taliban, have been in charge now for a few years. Like, is there, like, an attempt by the de facto authorities, the de facto rulers of Afghanistan to, confront this in any meaningful way?
I mean, from conversations with various different ministries, yes, there is a sense that this is a big problem, but there is simply a big lack of resources within the ministries, but also just financial resources. I mean, the level of investment that would be needed in order to complete some of those infrastructure projects that needs more support than what the current government or the authorities would be able to provide at this point of time. But I would certainly say that there is awareness about the problem.
And I would imagine, and you're a humanitarian, so I'm not going to put you on the spot, but presumably the relationship that the de facto authorities have with the outside world is maybe not necessarily like inspiring the amount of investment that might be needed to upgrade water infrastructure. Like you're not going to get a lot of foreign direct investment. You're not going to get a lot of foreign aid, which under normal circumstances would support projects like this.
Yeah, that is indeed a problem, and it's for us NGOs obviously a big challenge that often, yeah, that there's, how can I say, different stakeholders are not necessarily talking with each other. I actually joined, I think it was last week, a panel discussion which was organized by UNAMA, which is the UN mission here in Afghanistan, which and that's like a webinar series that is actually addressing like the climate change challenges here in Afghanistan. So last week was also discussion specifically around water, and it was actually a very interesting panel as well as audience, because it brought together government or like authorities. So there was the minister of the Ministry for Water and Energy was, for example, present. But then on the other hand, it also had donor governments in this webinar. So, and I think it was actually a very interesting platform to bring together stakeholders that naturally don't necessarily meet in Afghanistan, but yet to actually talk about this challenge that we're facing here in Afghanistan in a, can I say, non-political way, which was actually quite refreshing to see. And I think this is something that we would like to see more, to have these kind of conversations.
So, you mentioned earlier you've been living in Kabul for many years at this point. When you're walking around the streets, driving around the streets of Kabul, how are you seeing people deal with this water scarcity? Surely it's impacting day-to-day lives of people.
Sure. I mean, frankly speaking, you probably see it more in areas of Kabul where I don't necessarily spend a lot of time. But even I would say, like in the city center, etc., it's becoming more visibly. I mean, you have the Kabul River, which is really, I mean, I struggle to call it a river at this point of time, because it's really more of a little stream, quite a dirty stream that is making its way through the city. You see by now increasing amounts of people at like some of these central water points, like, I mean, for example, at mosques, etc., where some people collect their water. So there's increasing numbers of people who are coming to these points. So yeah, I would say it is slowly, but it is becoming quite visible in Kabul.
And there's presumably like a booming private market of water, people just kind of buying and selling water, delivering water.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, as I mentioned in the beginning, people spend by now about 30% of their income on water. So this is, yeah, coming from like private companies that are selling water by now here in Kabul. I mean, you often hear these little trucks driving through the streets, making their funny music. So yeah, that is increasing.
Yeah, like an ice cream truck here, but for water.
Yes, exactly.
Um, So, you mentioned this a couple times now, but I want to dive a little deeper. That again, you have this dwindling supply, but also this increasing demand, as a huge number of people are returning to Afghanistan. Over the last year or so, millions of Afghans who had, fled to principally Iran and Pakistan are being forcibly returned back to Afghanistan, presumably, putting a strain on these already limited resources. How is the dynamic of the returnees, those who are being like forced back into Afghanistan after having, not lived here for decades in some cases, impacting water scarcity issues?
Yeah, I mean that is obviously a big challenge. So yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, Afghanistan is facing quite a returnee crisis, as we call it here, both from Pakistan as well as Iran. I think alone in this year, alone in 2025, we had about 2.45 people so far returning from those two countries. Obviously, especially from Pakistan, the crisis started already in 2023. So if we look back into 2023, up to now, we have about at least 4.5 million returnees since, which obviously has a massive impact on the communities here. We have a little bit later this year published a second report that addresses actually exactly that topic, between the returnee crisis and the water crisis in Kabul, in Afghanistan. We specifically looked into two provinces for that. The one province is Herat, which is in the west of Afghanistan, which is taking in a lot of the returnees from Iran, as well as Kandahar, which is in the south and is taking in a lot of the returnees from Pakistan. And so in both provinces, it became very evident from our conversations with the communities that they really feel the impact. I think it was about 70% of the respondents highlighted that they do feel already the constraint on their water resources since the returnees started coming back. When I was in Herat a little bit a few months ago, and we visited one of the communities where we had repaired one of the water networks, they also mentioned to us, well, it's great that you've done this for us. And, the community, the size that we originally were, this was also totally sufficient. But now we're getting 300 additional families in here. We don't know how to cope. We definitely need a second network. And so in another incident where we were engaging with communities, and we're trying to find out where the water source is in order to get water into a community. And normally in the past, it was always quite easy to negotiate with neighboring communities that we could access their water source in order to then pump the water into the neighboring community. By now, these kind of negotiations became so much more difficult because communities, understandably, don't want to share their water sources anymore because they're obviously rapidly depleting as well.
So, I mean, the crisis that you describe just seems to be on not only just like the scale of Kabul, but like a real national scale. And, climate change isn't going anywhere. You're seeing an increased number of people forcibly returned to Afghanistan. It seems, and your report noted that 2030 is likely the year if present trends continue that Kabul will just run out of water. What can be done to prevent that really kind of dire and seemingly catastrophic outcome?
Good question.
That's why they pay
um,
me the big bucks, Marianne.
yeah, I know, I know, I know. I mean, I think the first thing as we look at this crisis that we need to consider, especially as how can I say, more external stakeholders, is that the communities we're working with here in Afghanistan are not just passive victims of the situation. I mean, a lot of them, are trying to manage this crisis by developing themselves already sharing plans or water management plans, etc. So I think this is something that we actually need to build on the capacities that are actually already existing in Afghanistan in order to deal with this crisis. So we really need to have a very community-centered approach if we want to address it. I mean, for us NGOs, I think things that that we can address is obviously working with the communities on these kind of water management plans, um, ensuring that our programming, and this is obviously something we're really working on, is on the one hand obviously focused on the emergency needs that people might just have in this immediate moment. I mean, for example, providing water trucking at the border points, but then obviously also ensuring that we're providing more sustainable solutions within the communities. This should obviously not just be borehole drilling, because that is really becoming an increasing issue, but providing also more climate resilient solutions together with the communities. For example, looking into rainwater harvesting, etc. So I think there's quite a lot that we can and that we need to do on community level. But then there is obviously a lot of work that is needed on a policy level, and really on a how can I say, bigger infrastructure level, that will need more global support, certainly.
Well, can I ask you about that last point? Kind of addressing the elephant in the room, which is the Taliban's kind of antagonistic relationship and foreign governments' antagonistic relationships with the Taliban. They are the authorities. They are the ones running the country right now. Yet, under normal circumstances, this would be a situation in which you would see some more international investment, both through aid or even through, private foreign direct investment. But that doesn't seem to be happening at a sufficient scale at the moment. Is there anything that can be done, in your view, to um, maybe like encourage the international community to work to address the water crisis in Afghanistan in ways that may not necessarily imply a support for the de facto government?
I mean, I think the first point that I want to just highlight, obviously, is that this crisis did not just happen within the last 4 years. I mean, it's a crisis that really built up over a very, very long time by now. So, and it should have been addressed also already, pre-Taliban takeover. Um, I think, I mean, it's a good question. It's a tricky one because, yes, of course. I mean, there are a lot of restrictions, and as you highlighted, um, in other contexts where there is a way closer collaboration between the donor governments and the host government, a lot of these investments are easier. But I do believe that there is nevertheless also ways to channel more of this investment. Obviously, I do feel we NGOs could certainly step up in taking some of this investment and ensuring that it's being, how can I say, properly and in a compliant manner being implemented here. Um, but then again, as I mentioned earlier, I think we need to also create platforms where there is some sort of a non-political engagement happening to address this challenge. Because ultimately, yes, right now the immediate impact is on Afghanistan and it is on the Afghan people. Um, but the impact will ultimately be bigger if we don't address it now here in Afghanistan. So, yeah.
Well, Mariana, thank you so much for your time speaking with me today from Kabul. I call this show Global Dispatches. I've been doing this for, almost 13, 14 years at this point. Just over the last couple of weeks, I've done these live streams from Kabul, from Caracas, from Cameroon. So I appreciate your time and you and the audience. If you appreciate what I do with this show, please show your support by getting a paid subscription. And also check out Mariana's work at Mercy Corps. I'll post a link to your report on Kabul's water crisis in the show notes of this episode when I publish it as a podcast episode. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mariana, and I appreciate
Thank,
your time.
thank you very much.